Chinatown, and I'm literally having to evade a Vietnamese guy. I only know he's Vietnamese because the first thing he said when he walked up to me was that he was Vietnamese. I was at Mac's stop on the other side of the river, and he just came charging up to me asking me, do you have money? You know, like, it's a scam. I'm from a foreign country. Do you have money that you can give me? It's like, no man, sorry. And he kept, like, I'd walk this way, he'd walk that way, I'd go back this way, he'd go back this way. And got on the Max, got off when I did, and for a while was going my direction, but I think I've lost him. So anyway, I didn't just get off at Chinatown to elude somebody who wanted my money. I'm here because I'm coming to Everett Street, so actually I'm only like a couple blocks away, but anyway, I'm here because this is a new episode of Historic Murders of Portland. Somehow this series always brings me back towards the Chinese gardens. I don't know why. It's like the 10th time I passed it doing an episode, but for my sake I'm coming to the intersection of Northwest 2nd and Everett, which is this intersection right here. And for our story, it's November 7th, 1910. Exactly 75 years to the day before my best friend was born. 11 days before me. But yeah, this is another... Ugh, loud as hell. But yeah, this is another area where nothing. Like, this is probably the oldest structure on this block, because this is new, that's made to look old, but is also new. And if you go down a little further, go down this way, you can see a lot more older structures that still stand. That's more like the focal China, like the real Chinatown part of Chinatown, even though we're still technically there. And back in 1910, this block looked a lot like what that area down there looks, probably even older. And this was known as Chinatown now, but this was always known as the North End, Portland's notorious North End, because it was just lined with saloons and beat-up rooming houses, and there was just a lot of crime, a lot of vice, a lot of prostitution, just a lot of just everything. Especially when Prohibition got here, because this was like all saloons, and all of a sudden your main moneymaker was gone, so you had to start finding other ways to make money. And there was a saloon at this intersection. I don't know if it was that side, but there was a saloon at this intersection called, I think it was just called Bruno's Saloon, and it was run by a guy named Pete Bruno, who was, even for the North End here, he was a notorious figure above most others. And his saloon was right on this block. It may have been right here. I don't know. But on November 7th, 1910, there was an Italian waiter named Dan Patrit, is my understanding. His last name was spelled Patrit, Patrit. I don't know if it had a certain, if it was pronounced differently or anything. That's just primarily what I have to go on. And Dan Patrit, it seems like he was just a guy either going home from work, going to work, or just going about his day, generally. But he was walking past Bruno's Saloon at this intersection, and seemingly out of nowhere, he was gunned down in cold blood. He was just shot dead, fell on the sidewalk right in front of Bruno's Saloon. And there's an interesting twist to all this, because right when all this was happening, Pete Bruno, who, was probably making a pretty good living to a degree beyond his saloon, he was probably making a pretty good living engaged in all kinds of criminal enterprise. He'd probably pissed off a lot of people. And he had received a note essentially telling him, deposit $1,000 at a location of our choice, which I believe was on Front Avenue, way up by Waterfront Park. Well, actually only like 2 blocks this way. And essentially, you know, it was pretty cut and dry. Give us this money now or your life is in danger. So Pete Bruno's life is already being threatened, and then suddenly out of nowhere a guy gets gunned down right in front of his saloon. And Pete Bruno said that in the immediate aftermath, some guy came charging into his saloon, some guy he'd never seen before, who essentially said, like, this is because of, words to this effect, this is because of you, you did this, this is, you know, his blood is on your hands, you did this, and then took off. And he has no idea who this guy was, but obviously, either they were trying to set up a situation where they would make it look like he was guilty for this, which they couldn't do because he was in his place of business with other people. Like, he obviously could prove that he wasn't the one that did this, or maybe it was just like, this is a warning, we did this to some random guy, so trust me, we'll do the same to you if you don't pay up. It seemed like whoever did this was, whoever came running into the place yelling at him was in some way tied to at least whoever was trying to extort money from him. So it was very interesting that those two things were happening at that time, and they actually tried to bust these guys. They actually had some local detectives made fake bills and took them to this mailbox that Bruno was told to send this money to up on Front Avenue. And they showed up, deposited it, waited for the guilty extortion artists to show up, and they never showed up. So maybe the detectives exposed themselves. Maybe it was all a ruse just to scare Pete Bruno. I really don't know. But it was unsuccessful, so they never really did figure out exactly who this was. But whoever did it was probably, you'd have to argue or think at that time, was probably in some way responsible for what happened to Dan Patrit. And it's so sad because it's a completely pointless crime. This wasn't a guy who was sleeping with another man's wife. He didn't rob someone. It was, he wasn't murdered for vengeance, jealousy, rage, envy, which I guess is jealousy. Like, just nothing. It seemed like he was just gunned down to prove a point. And in the immediate aftermath, there was one suspect that came under scrutiny, another local Italian gentleman. Pretty much the only reason he came under scrutiny was he was seen in the vicinity of Front Avenue, where they were trying to, deposit this fake money and get somebody caught for the extortion. But they had no evidence on the guy, so he was let go. And the Dan Patrit case pretty much just kind of faded into obscurity. It was really kind of just lost underneath the drama of the Pete Bruno mystery. People and police force seemed more interested in looking into Pete Bruno and his background and figuring out this extortion case against him than actually trying to figure out who killed Dan Patrit right in front of his place. So the case lingered unsolved. It seems like they weren't really that invested in solving it in the first place. And then you fast forward ahead to the spring of 1913. So it's been about 2.5 years since Dan Patrit was shot down. No new leads or anything. And randomly, out of the blue, a guy named Mike Gallo, who ran what's the term? I love the term. I forget what it's called. A bunco gang. He led a bunco gang. I just love that terminology. Mike Gallo was a guy that ran a bunco gang, and they worked out of Portland for a while. They worked out of Portland during the time that Dan Patrit was shot. And at this time, Michael Gallo is serving a 14-year sentence in San Quentin. And out of nowhere, You know, maybe thinking, oh, this is an unsolved crime. Maybe I can shave a little time off my sentence for giving some info. He randomly out of nowhere tells local authorities that he had a buddy named Danny. Remember, Dan Patrick's first name was Dan. And he had this friend named Danny who was a bit of a gambler. No real verification on whether Dan Patrit was actually a gambler at all. But, ooh, Old Town. I love me some Old Town. But, anyway, he says his buddy Danny got killed in Portland, got shot on the street, exact same way that Dan Patrit died. And he was gunned down by a guy, and I don't know how to pronounce the name. It's spelled Crouda. No first name. I guess Crouda? I guess Crouda sounds accurate. Yeah. His details were slightly different on one point, though. He said that this Crouda guy gunned down his friend Danny in a saloon, and Dan Patrit was shot down in front of a saloon. Now, that is a detail that you can get wrong. I mean, this Michael Gallo wasn't admitting to have been there. He was just saying that his buddy Danny got shot in a saloon in Portland a couple years earlier. And here we have a guy named Dan Patrit getting shot a couple years earlier in front of a saloon. So authorities pretty quickly put the pieces together and thought, you know, Michael Gallo's probably talking about the murder of Dan Patrit. Hey, fellas. Having to maneuver my way through some real killers if you mess with them. So in the end, we can't fully say that the Dan Patrit murder was solved. The authorities just had a theory that they liked to go on. And you have a guy who worked out of Portland in the criminal enterprise at the time period, specifically when Dan Patrit was gunned down, you know, in an area where gamblers like to hang out. So maybe Dan Patrit was a gambler, but they're thinking that, you know, with Michael Gallo's seeming personal knowledge of the case, the theory the police force went with in the end was Patrit probably got mixed up with, you know, people from Michael Gallo's Bunko gang, or people that they were associated with, this kind of slew of criminals, and they might have been, you know, the Gallo Bunko gang, as they were mostly called. They were known for, you know, committing robberies left and right in the city while they were here, and they thought maybe Dan Patrit got mixed up in that and was maybe shot as a result of a disagreement in terms of how to spread the wealth, how to spread the loot of some recent robbery they'd conducted. And he was gunned down in retribution for starting trouble with the wrong people, is kind of the general idea. So in the end, if that theory is to be believed, in the end, Pete Bruno, who seemed to be the focal point in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, may have had nothing to do with it. I don't know if Pete Bruno and this Michael Gallo were associated with each other. They were both committing crimes, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were super close with one another. But in the end, Pete Bruno may have had no real connection to it. No connection to the Dan Patrit killing. Dan Patrit killing may have had nothing to do with these people that just at the exact same time conveniently were trying to extort Pete Bruno out of a bunch of cash. It may have been this Bunko gang altogether. And that is, that's just in the end what we're left with, is a couple theories. And that's really it in terms of the murder of Dan Patrit in front of Pete Bruno's saloon in the old North End, now Chinatown, back in 1910. So as always, thank you for watching. And remember, as always, to like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your pets. Pets watch TV sometimes. And hit up my Patreon if you want to help me out that way. And all that said, till next time, from Waterfront Park. I don't know how I made it all the way up here, but I did. This has been Steve the Amateur Historian, and I'll see you next time.